Dr. Marcus Chen never wanted to be a soldier. He joined the Terran Defense Force as a field medic because he believed in saving lives, not taking them. His small frame and gentle demeanor made him look more like a librarian than a warrior. Other soldiers in his unit often joked that he couldn't hurt a fly, and they weren't wrong. Marcus had never fired a weapon in anger, never thrown a punch, never even raised his voice in argument. The war with the Kralith Empire had been raging for 3 years when Marcus was assigned to the 42nd Infantry Regiment. The Kralith were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous armor-like skin and 4 powerful arms. They valued strength above all else and had conquered dozens of worlds through sheer military might. To them, humans were weak, soft creatures barely worth conquering. Marcus's first deployment was to the mining colony of Kepler 438b, a rocky, world rich in rare minerals that both sides desperately needed. The human settlement was small, just 5,000 civilians working the mines and their families. The Kralith wanted the planet, and they were coming with overwhelming force. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, the regiment's commanding officer, briefed the medical team on their first day. "The Kralith don't take prisoners," she said grimly. "They consider mercy a weakness. If they break through our lines, they'll kill everyone on this planet, including the civilians." Marcus felt his stomach turn. He had read the reports from other worlds the Kralith had conquered. They left no survivors, viewing it as the most efficient way to prevent future rebellion. The thought of 5,000 innocent people, including children, facing such a fate made him physically ill. The 42nd Regiment had only 800 soldiers to defend the entire colony. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, but they had the advantage of defensive positions and knowledge of the terrain. Marcus set up his medical station in the main settlement, close enough to the front lines to reach wounded soldiers quickly, but far enough back to have some protection. The first attack came at dawn on the 3rd day. Marcus heard the thunderous roar of Kralith war cries echoing across the rocky plains before he saw them. Thousands of 8-foot-tall warriors charged toward the human defensive lines, their 4 arms wielding massive weapons that could cut a human in half with a single swing. The battle was brutal. Human pulse rifles cracked constantly, sending bright energy bolts toward the advancing enemy. Explosive charges detonated among the Kralith ranks, but they kept coming. For every warrior that fell, 2 more took his place. The aliens seemed to feel no fear, no hesitation. They lived for battle, and death in combat was their greatest honor. Within the first hour, wounded soldiers began arriving at Marcus's station. Private Johnson stumbled in with a deep gash across his chest where a Kralith blade had nearly found its mark. Sergeant Kim was carried in unconscious, his left arm hanging by mere threads of muscle and bone after being caught in an explosion. Marcus worked with steady hands and a calm voice, treating wounds that would have killed men in previous centuries. Advanced medical technology allowed him to seal arteries, mend bones, and even regrow lost tissue. But it still required skill and knowledge to use properly. He had trained for 6 years to become a combat medic, learning not just how to heal, but how to do it quickly under the worst possible conditions. "Doc, they're breaking through on the eastern perimeter," gasped Private Chen, no relation despite the shared name. "Captain Rodriguez is calling for all available personnel to grab weapons and hold the line." Marcus looked up from Sergeant Kim's mangled arm. Around him, wounded soldiers were watching him with desperate eyes. Some could return to battle with basic treatment, but others needed immediate surgery or they would die. If he left now to fight, these men would perish. If he stayed to treat them, the Kralith might overrun the entire position. "You go," Marcus told the other medics in his unit. "I'll stay with the critical cases." For the next 6 hours, Marcus worked alone while the battle raged around him. The sound of gunfire grew closer, and occasionally he could hear the distinctive roar of Kralith warriors just outside the medical station. Twice, enemy soldiers actually entered the building, but each time human defenders arrived just in time to drive them back. Marcus never looked up from his patients. His hands moved with practiced precision, treating one wounded soldier after another. He stopped bleeding, repaired organs, and saved lives while chaos erupted around him. When the building shook from nearby explosions, he simply braced himself and continued working. Late in the afternoon, the gunfire began to fade. Marcus finally allowed himself to hope that the humans had held their ground. Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway of the medical station, her uniform torn and bloody but her eyes bright with victory. "We did it, Doc," she said. "They're retreating." Marcus nodded, too exhausted to speak. He had saved 14 soldiers that day, men who would have died without his care. But as he looked around the medical station, he realized something had changed. The wounded soldiers were looking at him differently. There was respect in their eyes, and something else. Gratitude, perhaps, but deeper than that. "You could have taken a weapon and helped us fight," said Sergeant Kim, whose arm Marcus had successfully reattached. "Instead, you stayed here and saved our lives. That took more courage than anything we did out there." Marcus shook his head. "I'm just a medic. I do what I'm trained to do." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew that today had been different. He had made a choice to prioritize healing over fighting, and that choice had saved lives. The Kralith valued strength and combat prowess above all else, but perhaps there were different kinds of strength. Perhaps the power to heal was just as important as the power to destroy. What Marcus didn't know was that several Kralith warriors had witnessed his work that day. They had seen the small human who refused to fight, who instead focused entirely on healing his wounded comrades. To the Kralith, this behavior was incomprehensible. Warriors were meant to seek glory in battle, not tend to the fallen. But they had also seen something else. They had seen Marcus continue working even when the building was under attack, never abandoning his patients even when his own life was in danger. This strange combination of apparent weakness and absolute determination puzzled them in ways they didn't yet understand. The Kralith would remember the small human medic, though they didn't yet know his name, and Marcus Chen, who had only wanted to save lives, had no idea that his actions that day would echo across the galaxy and change the course of the war itself. The next Kralith attack came 2 weeks later, and this time they brought siege equipment, massive artillery pieces that could punch through reinforced concrete, walker mechs that stood 30 feet tall, and thousands more warriors than before. The humans had used the respite to strengthen their defenses, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. Marcus had treated over 40 wounded soldiers since the first battle. Each one returned to duty with a story about the medic who had saved their life. Word spread throughout the regiment that Dr. Chen could work miracles, that soldiers who should have died somehow walked away from his medical station whole and healthy. The stories weren't entirely accurate, but they weren't entirely wrong either. Marcus had always been skilled, but something about combat medicine brought out abilities he hadn't known he possessed. His hands seemed to know exactly where to find hidden injuries. His mind calculated drug dosages and surgical procedures with lightning speed, and his calm presence somehow helped patients heal faster than medical science said was possible. "They're coming again," announced Captain Rodriguez during the morning briefing. "Intelligence suggests they're bringing 3 times the force they used in the first attack. Our orders are to hold the colony as long as possible and evacuate civilians if the line breaks." Marcus listened while checking his medical supplies. He had enough basic materials for perhaps 20 serious injuries, 30 if he was careful. But if this attack was as large as predicted, he would need much more. He began calculating how to stretch his resources, which treatments could be delayed, which soldiers might survive with minimal intervention. The Kralith assault began before sunrise with a devastating artillery barrage. The ground shook continuously as massive shells exploded throughout the human positions. Marcus found himself treating injuries from the bombardment even before the actual attack began. Shrapnel wounds, concussions, and crush injuries from collapsed buildings kept him busy as the sun rose over the battlefield. When the Kralith ground forces finally advanced, they came in waves that seemed endless. The first wave consisted of standard infantry, 8-foot warriors with energy weapons and bladed arms. The second wave brought heavy assault troops in powered armor. The third wave included the walkers, mechanical giants that strode across the battlefield like ancient gods of war. Human defenses held for the first hour, but gradually began to crack under the relentless pressure. Marcus watched through the windows of his medical station. As defensive positions were overrun one by one, the wounded came to him in increasing numbers and their injuries grew more severe as the battle intensified. Corporal Davis arrived with both legs shattered by walker fire. Private Yamamoto had lost an eye and most of her left arm to a Kralith blade. Sergeant Torres was barely conscious from blood loss after taking shrapnel to his abdomen. Each case required immediate attention, but there were too many and too few hands to help. Marcus made a decision that went against his medical training. Instead of trying to treat everyone perfectly, he began performing rapid triage, quick procedures that would stabilize patients and get them back into the fight, even if they weren't fully healed. It was dangerous medicine, but it was the only way to save the unit. He injected combat stimulants that would mask pain and boost adrenaline, applied emergency tissue sealants that would hold wounds closed for a few hours, and used nerve blocks to restore function to damaged limbs. The soldiers he treated weren't truly healed, but they were functional enough to return to battle. What Marcus didn't realize was that his rapid-fire medical procedures were being observed. A Kralith reconnaissance unit had infiltrated the human position and was watching the medical station through advanced optics. They recorded everything Marcus did, every impossible save, every soldier who should have died but walked away ready to fight again. To the Kralith observers, what they were seeing defied explanation. Humans were fragile creatures who died easily in combat, yet this one human seemed able to restore damaged warriors to fighting condition in minutes. Warriors who had suffered injuries that should have been fatal were returning to battle again and again. The reconnaissance team leader, War Commander Thex, studied the recordings with growing confusion. In Kralith culture, the wounded were left to die or killed quickly to end their suffering. Medical treatment was considered wasteful, a sign of weakness that prevented natural selection from strengthening the species. Yet here was a human who seemed to make his species stronger through healing rather than weaker through mercy. As the battle raged into its second day, something unprecedented happened. The human defensive line, which should have collapsed under the Kralith assault, began to stabilize. Soldiers who had been wounded and should have been removed from combat kept returning to their positions. The humans were fighting with a determination and resilience that the Kralith had never encountered. Marcus had been working for 36 hours straight when Captain Rodriguez found him in the medical station. He was treating Private Johnson for the third time, the young soldier having been wounded, healed, and returned to combat twice already. "Doc, you need to rest," the captain said. "You're pushing yourself too hard." Marcus looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Can't stop. Too many wounded. They need me." "The medics from the other companies have been reassigned here," Rodriguez replied. "They can handle things for a few hours while you sleep." But Marcus shook his head. "They don't understand. It's not just about treating injuries. It's about getting them back in the fight quickly. Every soldier who returns to the line might save 10 civilians." Rodriguez watched as Marcus continued working on Private Johnson's wounds. The young soldier had taken a Kralith energy blast to his shoulder, an injury that should have required surgery and weeks of recovery. Instead, Marcus was using a combination of tissue regenerators, nerve stimulators, and synthetic blood to have him combat-ready within the hour. "How are you doing this?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "The other medics can't work at this speed." Marcus paused in his work. The truth was, he didn't entirely know. Something about the desperate circumstances had unlocked abilities he hadn't known he possessed. His understanding of human physiology seemed deeper, his hands steadier, his mind clearer than ever before. It was as if the need to save lives had transformed him into something more than he had been. "I just do what needs to be done," he said simply. Unknown to Marcus, War Commander Thex was studying the latest reconnaissance reports in the Kralith command post. The human defensive line was holding despite overwhelming odds, and the reason seemed to be concentrated around a single individual. A small human who appeared to have no combat training but whose mere presence was multiplying the effectiveness of the entire human force. "What is this creature?" Thex asked his intelligence officer. "Our best analysis suggests he is what humans call a medic, War Commander, a healer rather than a warrior." Thex studied the recordings again. In Kralith society, there was no equivalent role. Warriors fought until they died, and death in battle was the highest honor. The concept of healing warriors to fight again was alien to everything they believed. "This medic is making their forces stronger," Thex observed. "He must be eliminated." The intelligence officer nodded. "Shall I dispatch assassins?" Thex considered the question. Assassinating a non-combatant would normally be beneath Kralith honor, but this situation was unprecedented. The small human healer was having a greater impact on the battle than any human warrior. Not yet, Thex decided. First, I want to understand how he does this. Study him more closely, learn his methods. As the second day of battle ended with the human line still intact, Marcus finally allowed himself a few hours of rest. He had treated over 60 wounded soldiers, many of them multiple times. His rapid healing techniques had kept the human force at nearly full strength despite horrific casualties. But he had also done something else without realizing it. He had captured the attention of an enemy that had never before encountered anyone like him. The Kralith were beginning to understand that this small, seemingly weak human represented something they had never faced: the power to turn defeat into victory through the simple act of refusing to let anyone die. War Commander Thex received orders from the Kralith High Command that changed everything. The human colony of Kepler 438b was to be taken within one solar rotation, regardless of casualties. The Empire needed those rare minerals, and the stubborn human defense was becoming an embarrassment to Kralith military pride. More concerning to Thex was the intelligence report that had reached High Command. Human forces across multiple star systems were beginning to employ similar rapid healing techniques. Somehow, word of the small medic's methods was spreading and human military effectiveness was increasing dramatically. What had started as a local tactical problem was becoming a strategic threat to Kralith military dominance. Marcus was unaware of the larger implications of his work. He only knew that the third major assault was coming, and this time the Kralith intended to finish the fight. Reconnaissance showed massive troop buildups, orbital bombardment platforms being moved into position, and elite Kralith shock troops being deployed for the first time in the conflict. Captain Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of all senior personnel. The news was grim. "They're bringing everything they have," she announced. "Orbital strikes will begin at dawn, followed by a ground assault with forces we can't possibly match. Command is ordering civilian evacuation, but the transport ships won't arrive for another 18 hours. The room fell silent. 18 hours was an eternity in combat. The human defenders would have to hold against overwhelming odds for 3 times longer than any previous engagement. Many of the soldiers had already been wounded and healed multiple times. Even Marcus's miraculous techniques had limits. "What about withdrawal?" asked Lieutenant Park. "Negative," Rodriguez replied firmly. "If we abandon our positions, the Kralith will overrun the civilian evacuation sites. 5,000 people will die. We hold the line no matter what." After the meeting, Marcus returned to his medical station to prepare. He inventoried his supplies, set up additional treatment areas, and tried to calculate how many wounded he could handle in 18 hours of continuous combat. The numbers were daunting. Private Johnson found him there as the sun set. The young soldier had been wounded 4 times in the previous battles and healed each time by Marcus. "Doc, I wanted to thank you. Before you patched me up the first time, I was ready to give up. Now I feel like I can take on the whole Kralith army." Marcus looked at the soldier's eyes and saw something that troubled him. There was a fervor there, an almost reckless confidence that hadn't been present before. "Johnson, when you go back out there, I want you to be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks just because you know I can fix you up. But Doc, you can fix anything. You've brought guys back from the dead." "I haven't brought anyone back from the dead," Marcus said firmly. "I can treat injuries, but I can't perform miracles. If you take a direct hit from a Kralith heavy weapon, there won't be enough left to treat." Johnson nodded, but Marcus could see he didn't really believe it. The rapid healing techniques that had saved so many lives were creating an unintended side effect. The soldiers were becoming overconfident, taking greater risks because they believed Marcus could heal any injury. The orbital bombardment began at exactly dawn, just as predicted. Massive energy beams struck human defensive positions with pinpoint accuracy, obliterating bunkers and weapon emplacements that had taken weeks to construct. The ground shook continuously as the Kralith fleet pounded the human colony from space. Marcus found himself treating a new type of injury: energy burn wounds that went deep into tissue and bone. The Kralith orbital weapons caused damage that was difficult to heal quickly, requiring more time and resources than his rapid treatment methods allowed. He began to realize that the enemy had studied his techniques and adapted their weapons accordingly. When the ground assault finally began, it was unlike anything the humans had faced before. The Kralith came in coordinated waves, each perfectly timed to exploit weaknesses created by the previous attack. Elite shock troops led the advance, warriors who stood 9 feet tall and wore armor that could deflect most human weapons. The casualties were immediate and severe. Soldiers began arriving at Marcus's station with injuries that pushed his abilities to their limits. Sergeant Kim came in with burns covering 70% of his body. Private Yamamoto had lost both arms to a shock trooper's blade. Corporal Davis was dying from massive internal injuries caused by an explosion. Marcus worked faster than ever before, his hands moving in a blur as he fought to save lives. But for the first time since the battles began, he started losing patience. Kim died on the treatment table despite Marcus's best efforts. Yamamoto survived but would never fight again. Davis slipped away while Marcus was treating another soldier. The deaths hit Marcus harder than he had expected. He had begun to believe his own legend, to think that he could save anyone who made it to his medical station alive. The reality of his limitations was a brutal reminder that he was still just human, still just a medic doing his best in impossible circumstances. "Doc, we need you at the front line," called Lieutenant Park as he dragged in another wounded soldier. "The men are starting to panic. They need to see that you're still here, still working." Marcus looked around his medical station. Wounded soldiers covered every available surface, and more were arriving constantly. Leaving now would mean abandoning patients who needed immediate care. But staying might mean losing the psychological advantage his presence provided to the entire defensive line. Unknown to Marcus, War Commander Thex was watching the battle from his command post with intense interest. The Kralith assault was proceeding exactly as planned, but something was wrong. The human defensive line should have collapsed hours ago, yet pockets of resistance continued to fight with desperate determination. "Status report," Thex demanded. "Human casualties are extreme." "War Commander," replied his tactical officer. However, their combat effectiveness remains surprisingly high. The medic continues to treat wounded at an unprecedented rate. Thex studied the tactical displays showing human positions. Each time a section of the line looked ready to break, wounded soldiers would somehow return to combat. The small human healer was still having an enormous impact on the battle, even as Kralith forces gained ground. "I want that medic eliminated," Thex decided. "Assign our best sniper to the task. War Commander targeting medical personnel violates the codes of combat honor." Thex considered this. The Kralith military code forbade attacking non-combatants, and medics were traditionally considered protected personnel. But this situation was unprecedented. The human medic was having a greater strategic impact than most generals. "The human healer has become a legitimate military target," Thex declared. "His healing abilities make him a weapon of war, not a traditional medic. Take him out." Marcus was treating a soldier with severe head trauma when the sniper's energy bolt burned through the air inches from his head. The shot was perfectly aimed, and only a last-second movement to reach for medical supplies had saved his life. The bolt struck the wall behind him, leaving a smoking hole. "Sniper!" someone shouted, and suddenly soldiers were rushing to protect Marcus. They formed a human shield around his medical station, their own bodies serving as armor for the man who had saved so many of their lives. "You can't do this," Marcus protested. "You're wounded. You need treatment." "Doc, you've saved all of us at least once," said Private Johnson, blood streaming down his face from a fresh wound. "Now it's our turn to save you." Marcus looked around at the soldiers protecting him. Some were barely able to stand, held upright by pain medications and sheer determination. Others had wounds that should have kept them in bed for weeks. All of them were risking their lives to keep him safe. For the first time since the battles began, Marcus understood what he had become. He wasn't just a medic anymore. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that death wasn't inevitable, that someone would always fight to bring them home alive. The soldiers weren't just protecting him. They were protecting everything he represented. As another sniper bolt cracked overhead, Marcus made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. He picked up his medical kit and moved toward the front lines, his protective detail of wounded soldiers forming a moving shield around him. If the Kralith wanted to target him directly, he would make sure every shot they took risked hitting the very people he had saved. The small medic who had never wanted to be a soldier was about to teach the Kralith Empire what true strength looked like. Moving toward the front lines with his protective detail of wounded soldiers, Marcus witnessed something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The human defensive positions were being systematically destroyed by Kralith shock troops, but the defenders weren't retreating. Instead, they fought with a desperate fury that seemed to give them strength beyond their physical capabilities. Soldiers who should have been dead from their injuries continued firing their weapons. Men and women with missing limbs crawled forward to detonate explosives among Kralith forces. The wounded didn't withdraw to safety. They used their last moments to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. The rapid healing techniques Marcus had developed had created something he never intended: an army that refused to accept defeat. "Doc, over here!" Sergeant Torres called from a crater that had once been a defensive bunker. Half his squad was down, and the other half was running low on ammunition. A group of Kralith shock troopers was advancing on their position, their 9-foot frames moving with deadly precision. Marcus rushed to the crater, his protective detail spreading out to provide covering fire. Torres had a massive wound in his chest where Kralith energy fire had burned through his armor. Private Chen was unconscious from blood loss, her leg nearly severed by an explosion. Corporal Martinez was still fighting despite having lost his left eye and most of his left arm. Working under direct enemy fire, Marcus began treating the wounded with speed that bordered on supernatural. His hands moved independently, one working on Torres's chest wound while the other injected stimulants into Private Chen's bloodstream. He had developed an ability to prioritize treatments without conscious thought, his mind calculating optimal procedures while his hands executed them automatically. "Chen, can you feel your leg?" Marcus asked as he sealed the major arteries. "Yes, sir. Hurts like hell, but I can feel it." "Good. Torres, I'm giving you a pain blocker and tissue sealant. You'll be functional for about 6 hours, but then you need real surgery." 6 hours is all we need, Doc." As Marcus worked, he became aware that the Kralith shock troopers had stopped their advance. They were watching him, their 4 arms hanging motionless as they observed the small human who seemed to restore warriors to fighting condition in minutes. Through his helmet's translation system, Marcus could hear them talking in their guttural language. "This is the one," said the lead shock trooper, "the healer warrior that command spoke of." "He shows no fear," observed another. "Even with death weapons aimed at his head, he continues his healing work. How can such a small creature possess such power?" Marcus finished treating Private Chen and helped her to her feet. The young soldier tested her weight on the injured leg, found it solid, and immediately picked up her rifle. "Thanks, Doc. I'm ready to get back in there." The Kralith shock troopers watched this transformation with visible confusion. In their culture, severe injuries meant death or permanent disability. The concept of rapid healing that restored full combat capability was beyond their understanding. They had expected to find a human using some form of advanced technology, but Marcus was working with basic medical supplies and surgical tools. "Surrender," called the lead shock trooper in heavily accented English. "We will grant you honorable death for your healing skills." Marcus looked up from treating Corporal Martinez. "I'm not a warrior. I'm a medic. I don't surrender, and I don't fight. I just heal people. You make weak humans strong. This is warrior magic. It's not magic, it's medicine." The shock trooper leader studied Marcus with intelligent eyes. According to Kralith philosophy, only warriors possessed true strength. Yet this small human, who claimed to be a healer rather than a fighter, was having a greater impact on the battle than any human warrior they had encountered. "You will come with us," the shock trooper decided. "Our war shamans must study your methods." Before Marcus could respond, Private Johnson appeared at the crater's edge with a squad of human soldiers. They opened fire on the Kralith shock troopers, forcing the aliens to take cover behind the rubble of destroyed buildings. In the confusion, Marcus continued treating wounded soldiers as energy bolts flew overhead. "Doc, we need to get you out of here," Johnson called. "This position is about to be overrun." "I'm not leaving wounded soldiers," Marcus replied, applying emergency surgery techniques to Martinez's damaged eye socket. "Then we all stay and fight." What happened next would become legend throughout both human and Kralith space. Instead of retreating to safety, the human soldiers formed a defensive perimeter around Marcus's impromptu medical station. Wounded men and women who could barely stand took up firing positions to protect the medic who had saved their lives. The crater became a fortress of the walking wounded, held by soldiers who should have been in hospital beds. The Kralith shock troopers found themselves facing an enemy they had never encountered before. These humans fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but also with the tactical intelligence of experienced warriors. Every time a Kralith warrior wounded a human defender, the small healer would quickly restore them to fighting condition. It was like battling an army that couldn't be permanently damaged. War Commander Thex watched the engagement through his command sensors, his confusion growing with each passing minute. The humans defending the crater were outnumbered 5-1, yet they were holding their ground against elite Kralith shock troops. The tactical analysis made no sense until he focused on the common factor: the small human healer working in the center of the defensive position. "War Commander, our shock troops are requesting heavy artillery support," reported his tactical officer. "Denied," Thex replied immediately. "I want that position taken by ground forces. The healer must be captured alive." The battle for the crater continued for 3 hours. Kralith forces attacked in waves, each time expecting to overwhelm the human defenders through sheer numbers and superior firepower. But each attack failed as wounded humans were quickly restored to combat effectiveness by Marcus's impossible medical techniques. Marcus himself was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. His movements were slower, his hands less steady. The rapid healing procedures required enormous concentration and physical effort, and he had been working without rest for over 40 hours. But every time he considered stopping, another wounded soldier would arrive at his position, and he would find the strength to continue. "Doc, you're pushing yourself too hard," Sergeant Torres observed during a brief lull in the fighting. "Your hands are shaking." Marcus looked down and realized Torres was right. The constant stress and exhaustion were beginning to affect his motor control. "I'm fine. Just need to keep working." "You're not fine. You're about to collapse." But Marcus had made a promise to himself when the first wounded soldiers arrived at his station weeks ago. No one would die on his watch if he could prevent it. The promise had cost him sleep, food, and now his health, but he refused to break it. Unknown to Marcus, his refusal to abandon wounded soldiers was being recorded by Kralith intelligence units positioned around the crater. Every act of healing, every moment of exhaustion overcome by determination, every time he chose to help others despite personal risk, was being documented and transmitted to Kralith Command. The recordings would eventually reach the Kralith High Council, where they would spark debates that lasted for months. How could a being show such strength through apparent weakness? How could someone gain power by giving it away to heal others? The small human medic was challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of strength itself. As the sun began to set on the third day of battle, Marcus completed his latest round of treatments and looked around the crater. 67 soldiers had been wounded in the position, and 67 soldiers remained ready to fight. Not one had died under his care, though many had come close enough to touch death's door. The Kralith shock troopers pulled back to regroup, and in the temporary quiet, Marcus allowed himself a moment to rest. He didn't know it yet, but his actions in the crater had already changed the course of the war. The Kralith Empire was about to discover that sometimes the greatest weapon is the refusal to let anyone die alone. The evacuation ships arrived as scheduled, 18 hours after the final assault began, but they found something unexpected. The human defensive line hadn't just held, it had actually pushed the Kralith forces back in several key positions. The crater where Marcus had treated wounded soldiers had become a rallying point for the entire human defense. Inspiring acts of heroism that military analysts would study for decades. Marcus was unconscious when the evacuation began. 67 consecutive hours of high-intensity medical work had finally pushed his body beyond its limits. Sergeant Torres found him collapsed over his medical equipment, still trying to treat a wounded soldier even as exhaustion claimed him. His hands were cramped into claws from repetitive surgical procedures, and his pulse was dangerously irregular from stimulant abuse. "Get him on the first transport," Captain Rodriguez ordered. "He's earned his ticket home." But the wounded soldiers in the crater had other ideas. Private Johnson spoke for all of them when he said, "Doc doesn't go anywhere without us. We stick together." The entire evacuation had to be reorganized around Marcus's unconscious form. Soldiers who had been deemed critical cases insisted on delaying their own medical treatment until Marcus could be properly cared for. The man who had refused to abandon anyone found himself surrounded by people who refused to abandon him. During the transport to the medical station on Terra Nova, Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. In his fevered dreams, He relived every moment of the battles, every wounded soldier he had treated, every decision to stay and fight rather than retreat to safety. But he also experienced something else. Fragments of conversations in the guttural Kralith language, memories that shouldn't have existed. Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief medical officer at Terra Nova Station, had never seen anything like Marcus's condition when he arrived. His brain showed signs of severe exhaustion, but also unusual neural activity in regions associated with pattern recognition and motor control. His muscle memory had been enhanced to an almost superhuman level, allowing him to perform complex medical procedures faster than should have been physically possible. How long was he working without rest? Dr. Kim asked Sergeant Torres. 67 hours straight, ma'am. Maybe longer. Time gets fuzzy during combat. That's impossible. The human body can't maintain that level of performance. Torres looked at the unconscious medic with obvious respect. Doc redefined impossible, ma'am. He saved every single soldier who made it to his station alive. Everyone. Dr. Kim ran additional tests, her confusion growing with each result. Marcus's blood chemistry showed traces of compounds that didn't exist in standard medical supplies. His neural pathways had been altered in ways that suggested exposure to advanced biotechnology. Most puzzling of all, his DNA showed minor modifications that enhanced his ability to process multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. Sergeant, did Dr. Chen have access to any experimental medical equipment during the battles? No, ma'am. Basic field supplies only, but he could do things with that equipment that nobody else could do. What Dr. Kim didn't know was that Marcus's extended exposure to wounded soldiers had triggered a dormant human genetic trait. Under extreme stress, some humans could absorb and process biological information at an accelerated rate, essentially learning from every injury they treated. Marcus had unconsciously developed medical techniques that pushed the boundaries of what human science thought possible. Meanwhile, on the Kralith command ship, War Commander Thex was dealing with his own impossible situation. The small human medic had escaped, but the recordings of his work were causing unprecedented debates throughout the Kralith military hierarchy. 3 different war shamans had studied the footage and reached 3 different conclusions about what they had witnessed. The human possesses war magic unknown to our species, declared war shaman Korth. His healing abilities allowed inferior warriors to fight beyond their natural capabilities. Nonsense, replied war shaman Vex. The humans simply used advanced technology disguised as primitive medical equipment. Our intelligence was incomplete. The 3rd war shaman, an ancient warrior named Zach, offered a different perspective. The human strength came not from magic or technology, but from absolute dedication to his purpose. He chose healing over survival, others over self. This is a form of strength we do not understand. Thex listened to the debates with growing frustration. The Kralith Empire had conquered dozens of worlds by understanding their enemies' strengths and weaknesses. But this one human had demonstrated capabilities that didn't fit any known categories. He wasn't a great warrior, brilliant strategist, or advanced scientist. He was simply someone who refused to let others die, and somehow that refusal had made him nearly unstoppable. What are our options? Thex asked. We could attempt to capture him for study, suggested Korth. We could develop weapons specifically designed to counter his healing techniques, offered Vex. Or, said Zach quietly, we could try to understand what makes him so strong. Back on Terra Nova Station, Marcus finally awakened after 3 days of medical-induced sleep. His first words were predictable. How are my patients? They're all fine, Dr. Kim assured him. Every soldier you treated during the evacuation has made a full recovery. You did good work, Dr. Chen. Marcus tried to sit up, but his body protested. The exhaustion went deeper than muscle fatigue. It was as if his very cells were tired. I need to get back to active duty. There are more wounded soldiers who need treatment. Absolutely not. You're going home to Earth for extended recovery leave. I can't. The war isn't over. Dr. Kim studied Marcus with professional concern. She had seen combat fatigue before, but this was different. Marcus wasn't suffering from psychological trauma. He was suffering from an almost pathological inability to stop helping people. His dedication to healing had become so complete that he couldn't conceive of doing anything else. Dr. Chen, you've pushed your body beyond safe limits. If you don't take time to recover, you'll be useless to everyone. Marcus considered this argument. From a purely medical standpoint, Dr. Kim was correct. He needed rest and rehabilitation before he could effectively treat patients again, but the thought of wounded soldiers dying while he recovered on Earth was unbearable. "How long?" he asked. "Minimum 6 months. Preferably a year. I'll take 6 weeks. That's not nearly enough time. It's what I can spare." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. The Admiral was commander of the Terran Defense Force's Medical Corps, and she had traveled specifically to Terra Nova Station to meet the medic whose reputation was spreading throughout human space. "Dr. Chen, I have a proposition for you," the Admiral began. "We want to establish a new medical training program based on your techniques. Fast response combat medicine that can keep soldiers fighting longer and more effectively." Marcus shook his head. "My techniques aren't really teachable. They developed naturally during combat situations. That's what makes them so valuable. We need you to help us understand how you do what you do." "I don't even understand it myself." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, your work on Kepler 438b didn't just save lives. It changed the entire tactical situation. Human forces are using similar rapid healing techniques across multiple war zones, and our combat effectiveness has increased by 40%. You've given us an advantage we've never had before." Marcus felt a chill of realization. His desperate attempts to save individual soldiers had inadvertently created a new form of warfare. The techniques he had developed out of compassion were being weaponized on a galactic scale. "That's not what I intended," he said quietly. "Intentions don't matter in war," Admiral Chen replied. "Results matter, and your results are helping humanity win." But Marcus wasn't sure that winning through superior healing was actually winning at all. He had seen the look in his patients' eyes as they returned to combat again and again. The confidence that had saved lives was beginning to look like recklessness. The refusal to accept death was starting to resemble an inability to value life. Unknown to Marcus, similar conversations were taking place throughout Kralith space. The small human medic had become the subject of intense study and debate. Some Kralith leaders wanted to find ways to counter his techniques. Others wanted to understand and possibly adopt them. A few were beginning to question whether the Kralith approach to warfare was as superior as they had always believed. The medic who had never wanted to be a soldier was about to discover that sometimes healing people can be the most dangerous thing you can do. His refusal to let anyone die was changing not just the war, but the fundamental nature of conflict itself. And the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months into his recovery leave on Earth, Marcus received a message that changed everything. It came through official Terran Defense Force channels, but the content was unprecedented. The Kralith Empire was requesting a formal meeting with him personally, not with human military leadership, not with diplomatic representatives, but specifically with the medic who had defended Kepler. 438b to Admiral Chen delivered the message in person, arriving at Marcus's family home in rural Montana, where he had been trying to recover from his combat experiences. The quiet farm where he had grown up felt alien after months of constant battle, and Marcus found himself unable to sleep without the sound of distant gunfire. "This is highly irregular," Admiral Chen explained as they walked through the wheat fields behind Marcus's childhood home. "The Kralith have never requested direct communication with individual human soldiers before. Their culture doesn't recognize non-combat personnel as worthy of diplomatic attention." Marcus watched the golden wheat swaying in the breeze, a sight that should have been peaceful but instead reminded him of grass bending under the weight of wounded soldiers. "What do they want?" "We don't know." The message was brief and formal, but it specifically requested you by name. "They called you the healer warrior and said they wished to understand your methods." "I'm not a warrior." "To them, apparently you are." Our cultural analysts believe this meeting request represents a significant shift in Kralith thinking. They may be reconsidering their entire approach to warfare. Marcus stopped walking and looked at Admiral Chen directly. "Are you ordering me to attend this meeting?" "I can't order you to participate in diplomatic activities. This is a request, not a command. But I will say that this could be an opportunity to end the war without further bloodshed." The weight of that possibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a heavy coat. He had spent months trying to recover from the trauma of watching young soldiers die despite his best efforts. The thought that he might be able to prevent future deaths was compelling, but it also terrified him. He was a medic, not a diplomat. Where would this meeting take place? Neutral space. There's a research station at the edge of the Proxima system that both sides have agreed to respect. You would be completely safe. Marcus considered the offer while they walked back toward the farmhouse. His parents had been killed in a Kralith raid during the early years of the war, which was why he had originally joined the Terran Defense Force. The irony of potentially meeting with their killer's representatives was not lost on him. I'll do it, he decided. But I want to understand what I'm walking into. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself aboard a diplomatic transport heading toward the Proxima Research Station. The journey gave him time to study Kralith culture and history, trying to understand what had motivated their request. What he learned disturbed him more than he had expected. The Kralith Empire was built on a philosophy of strength through conflict. They believed that constant warfare was necessary to prevent species stagnation, that only through fighting could a civilization achieve its full potential. Death in battle was considered the highest honor, and mercy was viewed as a form of weakness that ultimately made societies vulnerable to conquest. Yet something about Marcus's actions on Kepler 438b had challenged these fundamental beliefs. The recordings of his work had been studied by Kralith war shamans, philosophers, and military strategists. For the first time in their recorded history, they had encountered a form of strength that came from healing rather than harming. The Proxima Research Station was a sterile environment of metal corridors and artificial atmospheres, designed to accommodate multiple species simultaneously. Marcus arrived to find that the Kralith delegation had been waiting for him for several hours, despite the meeting being scheduled for a specific time. Apparently, punctuality was another concept they were having difficulty understanding. War Commander Thex led the Kralith delegation, accompanied by the 3 war shamans who had studied Marcus's recordings. The aliens were even more imposing in person than they had appeared in combat footage. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and chitinous armor-like skin, they radiated an aura of barely controlled violence. "You are smaller than expected," Thex observed in heavily accented English as Marcus entered the meeting chamber. "Most humans are smaller than Kralith," Marcus replied diplomatically. "Yet you achieved more in battle than warriors twice your size." Marcus took a seat across from the Kralith delegation, acutely aware that he was probably the first human to engage in peaceful dialogue with these particular aliens. "I'm not a warrior. I'm a medic. I heal people." "This distinction puzzles us," admitted War Shaman Korth. "In our observations, your healing made human warriors more effective than any weapon enhancement. How is this not warfare? Because my goal isn't to harm your people. My goal is to prevent harm to mine." War Shaman Vex leaned forward with obvious interest. "Yet the result is increased human combat effectiveness. Intent does not alter outcome." Marcus realized he was being drawn into a philosophical debate that went to the heart of both species' understanding of conflict. "Perhaps. But the method matters. I save lives instead of taking them. Why?" asked War Shaman Zach, the oldest of the 3. "What advantage does this provide?" The question seemed simple, but Marcus found himself struggling to answer it. Why did he heal people? What drove him to risk his own life to save others? He had never really examined his motivations beyond the immediate need to help. "Because life has value," he said finally. "Every person who dies is a loss to their family, their community, their species. When I heal someone, I'm not just saving one life. I'm preserving all the potential that person represents." The Kralith delegation exchanged glances, communicating in rapid bursts of their guttural language. Finally, Thex spoke again. "This concept of preservation is foreign to us. We believe strength comes from testing. The weak must die so the strong can flourish." "But what if strength isn't about physical power?" Marcus asked. "What if it's about the ability to protect others, to heal damage, to make things better instead of worse?" "Impossible," Vex replied immediately. "Strength must be proven through conflict. I spent 67 hours treating wounded soldiers under direct enemy fire," Marcus pointed out. "If that's not conflict, what is?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus hadn't intended to be confrontational, but he was beginning to understand that the Kralith respected directness. They had come to this meeting because they needed to resolve a contradiction in their worldview, and polite diplomacy wouldn't provide the answers they sought. War Shaman Zach studied Marcus with intelligent eyes. "You fought without weapons, yet achieved victory. You showed mercy, yet demonstrated strength. You healed enemies as well as allies, yet gained tactical advantage. These contradictions violate our understanding of warfare. Maybe your understanding of warfare is incomplete. The statement was audacious, borderline insulting to a species that had built their entire civilization around military conquest. But instead of anger, Marcus saw something else in the Kralith faces: curiosity. "Explain," Thex commanded. Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that the next few minutes might determine not just his own fate, but the future of the war itself. "Your people believe that strength comes from defeating others. But what if true strength comes from lifting others up? What if the strongest civilizations are those that help their weakest members, rather than eliminating them?" "That would lead to species degradation," Korth objected. "Would it? Look at human civilization. We care for our sick, protect our weak, and help those who struggle. Yet we've managed to resist your empire for 3 years despite being individually weaker than your warriors." The Kralith delegation fell silent, processing this perspective. Marcus could see them struggling with concepts that challenged everything they had been taught about the nature of strength and survival. "You wish us to abandon our warrior culture," Vex said finally. "I wish you to expand it," Marcus replied. "What if healing could be as honorable as fighting? What if protecting life was as valuable as taking it?" War Shaman Zach leaned back in his chair, his forearms folded in contemplation. "This medic speaks of strength we do not understand. Perhaps there is wisdom in examining these concepts more carefully." Marcus realized that the meeting had reached a critical moment. The Kralith were actually considering the possibility that their fundamental beliefs about strength and warfare might be wrong. But he also sensed that pushing too hard would cause them to retreat into familiar patterns of thought. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," he said quietly. "I'm just asking you to consider that there might be other forms of strength worth respecting." The small medic who had never wanted to be a soldier was about to plant seeds of change in the heart of an empire built on conquest. Whether those seeds would grow or be crushed remained to be seen. The meeting at Proxima Station lasted for 3 days. What had begun as a simple diplomatic inquiry transformed into intensive philosophical discussions that challenged both species' understanding of strength, honor, and the nature of warfare itself. Marcus found himself explaining human concepts of compassion, mercy, and healing to beings who had built their entire civilization around conquest and dominance. On the final day, War Shaman Zach made an unprecedented request. "We wish to observe your healing techniques directly. Will you demonstrate your methods?" "I would need wounded subjects," Marcus replied carefully. "I don't heal healthy people." "This can be arranged," Thex said grimly. What happened next violated every diplomatic protocol ever established. Thex drew a ceremonial blade and deliberately cut deep gashes in his own arms, creating wounds that would have been serious even by Kralith standards. Green blood flowed freely as he offered himself as a test subject. "Heal me," he commanded. "Show us how the healer warrior works." Marcus stared at the wounded Kralith commander in shock. The cuts were deep enough to require immediate medical attention, and Thex was losing blood at a dangerous rate. But treating an enemy commander while under observation by hostile aliens was far beyond anything Marcus had been prepared for. "I need medical supplies," he said finally. The Kralith had brought basic human medical equipment, apparently anticipating this possibility. As Marcus examined the supplies, he realized they had studied his techniques extensively enough to know exactly what he would need. The level of preparation was both impressive and disturbing. Working on Thex felt different from treating human soldiers. Kralith physiology was similar enough to human biology that standard medical techniques were effective, but the differences were significant. Their blood chemistry was more complex, their muscle tissue denser, and their pain responses much higher than human norms. But as Marcus worked, he discovered something unexpected. The same focused calm that had allowed him to treat dozens of wounded soldiers under combat conditions settled over him now. His hands moved with practiced precision, sealing arteries, treating damaged tissue, and applying regenerative compounds to accelerate healing. The Kralith delegation watched in absolute silence as Marcus transformed, their commander from wounded warrior to fully functional soldier in less than 30 minutes. When he finished, Thex examined his arms with obvious amazement. The wounds were gone, replaced by faint scars that would fade completely within days. "Impossible," whispered War Shaman Vex. "No Kralith healer could work so quickly." "We have healers?" asked Korth with genuine surprise. The question revealed something important about Kraloth culture that Marcus hadn't previously understood. They didn't just avoid healing their wounded. They had eliminated healers from their society entirely. Medical treatment was considered a weakness that prevented natural selection from strengthening their species. "You don't have doctors?" Marcus asked. "Warriors heal naturally or die honorably," Thex explained. "Medical intervention prevents the weak from being culled." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. The Kraloth weren't just cruel or savage. They were trapped by their own philosophy. They had created a society where showing mercy or providing care was literally impossible without violating their core cultural values. "What happens to Kraloth who are born with disabilities?" Marcus asked quietly. "They are granted swift deaths to spare them dishonor," Zach replied. "And those who are injured but survive? They prove their strength by recovering without assistance." Marcus looked around the room at the 4 Kraloth representatives. "How many of your people die from injuries that could be easily treated?" "Death statistics are not tracked," Thex said. "Warriors either live or die. The outcome determines their worth." The casual acceptance of preventable death horrified Marcus more than the battles he had witnessed. The Kraloth Empire wasn't just waging war against humanity. It was waging war against its own people, sacrificing countless lives to maintain an ideology of strength through suffering. "There's another way," Marcus said carefully. "Healing doesn't make people weak. It makes them stronger." "How can this be?" Vex demanded. "Healing removes the pressure that drives natural selection. Because healed people can contribute to their society longer. They can learn more, teach others, create new innovations. Every life you save is a resource preserved." War Shaman Zach leaned forward with intense interest. "You speak of strength through accumulation rather than elimination." "Exactly. Human civilization is strong because we preserve knowledge, protect our vulnerable members, and help everyone reach their potential. We don't waste lives. But this creates weakness in the species," Korth objected. "The unfit survive and reproduce." "Does it? Look at human achievements. We've developed faster than light travel, created artificial intelligence, and built a civilization that spans multiple star systems. We did all of that while caring for our sick and protecting our weak." The Kraloth delegation fell silent, processing this argument. Marcus could see them struggling with concepts that challenged everything they believed about survival and strength. "Perhaps," Zach said slowly, "there are forms of strength we have not considered." "What do you mean?" Thex asked. "The human healer demonstrated abilities we cannot replicate. He preserved the life and fighting capacity of our commander in minutes. This represents a form of power we do not possess. Because we chose not to possess it," Vex pointed out. "Precisely. We made a choice based on our understanding of strength. But what if our understanding was incomplete?" Marcus realized that he was witnessing something historic. The first crack in the philosophical foundation of the Kraloth Empire. These warriors were actually questioning their most fundamental beliefs about the nature of strength and survival. "I have a proposal," Marcus said carefully. "What if we arranged for some of your healers to learn human medical techniques, and some of our medics to learn Kraloth physiology? We could share knowledge instead of just fighting." "We have no healers," Thex reminded him. "Then we'll train some. Warriors can learn new skills." The suggestion was radical beyond anything the Kraloth had ever considered. Training warriors to heal instead of harm violated every principle their civilization was built upon. But Marcus could see the idea taking root in their minds. "This would require approval from the High Council," Zach said finally. "And they would need to see evidence that healing can coexist with strength," added Thex. Marcus nodded. "I understand. But consider this. I saved hundreds of human soldiers during the battles for Kepler 438b. Those soldiers went on to fight more effectively than they ever had before. Healing didn't make them weak. It made them unstoppable." 6 months later, the first Kraloth medical students arrived at Terran Defense Force hospitals. The program was small, experimental, and controversial on both sides. Many humans couldn't accept the idea of teaching healing techniques to former enemies. Many Kraloth considered the students traitors to their warrior culture. But Marcus had volunteered to lead the program, working directly with Kraloth warriors to teach them human medical techniques. The process was difficult and often frustrating. The Kraloth students struggled with concepts like gentleness and empathy that were essential to effective healing. Yet gradually something extraordinary began to happen. Kralith warriors who learned to heal developed a different understanding of strength. They began to see that preserving life required as much courage and skill as taking it. Some even began to question whether their empire's endless wars were truly necessary. The change was slow and often imperceptible, but it was real. The Kralith Empire didn't transform overnight, but seeds of change had been planted. Marcus's refusal to let anyone die had evolved into something larger, a demonstration that strength could come from healing instead of harming. Years later, historians would mark the meeting at Proxima Station as the beginning of the end of the human-Kralith War. Not because of military victories or diplomatic treaties, but because a small medic had shown an entire empire a different way to be strong. Marcus Chen never became a famous general or celebrated war hero. He remained what he had always been, a medic who refused to let people die. But sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating enemies, but from showing them a better way to live. The galaxy was changing, one healed life at a time. And at the center of that change was a man who had never wanted to be a soldier, but who had become something far more powerful, a teacher of hope in a universe too familiar with despair.